I have to tell you a story about the cottage. I was looking for like the best English cottage door. I Googled English cottage door and what came up was Rose Hill Cottage from The Holiday. And I thought, oh my God, I've ruined the culture. My version in an American movie of an English cottage is now an English cottage door. My name is John Huttman. I'm a production designer. Welcome to my home. This is not a soundstage. This is not a set. We're in an unusual moment in cultural history. We're a little bit quarantined at home. Nonetheless, I'm here with you today to talk about set design, production design, and some of my favorite movies.
I wish you could help. I wish.
I had a gut feeling you would be online now. Hi.
We're going to talk about You've Got Mail, which is Nora Ephron's film from 1998. The movie is about a man and a woman who start having a relationship over AOL chat.
You've got mail.
Nora Ephron and her team are so good at delivering what this romantic comedy audience wants. In particular, Meg's apartment. There's something about just like the shape of her couch. The detail is so loving. One of the things that they've done with her apartment is they've taken out all the walls. It's very unusual that you can see all the way through from the front window where the camera comes in, which is kind of her bedroom area, to the kind of sitting room and kitchen in the back. Because you've got so many scenes at the laptop computer, they've put their desks in the center of the room. So you're intercutting between the two of them on their primitive, chunky laptop computers. So whether we use that as a table or whatever, it's got a very specific shooting, staging, depth, purpose. There's another clip toward the end of the movie where he actually comes over to her apartment. And she is now single and she's moved her bed, which is something that you might not notice. It feels real and faithful to the footprint of an Upper West Side townhouse. One of the big design challenges of this movie is the fact that the two main characters have most of their pivotal scenes until the third act of the movie online, which makes them either at their desks or in bed. The thing that I would have done differently in a big way is they both live in these kind of signature warm yellow apartments. If you look at them in their beds, she has a curved headboard and he has a square headboard, and she has a frilly bedside lamp and he has these very kind of architectural bedside lamps. I just wish that the walls in his apartment had been a different color. A small, subtle art department mistake is it's unusual that the bathroom vanity has exactly the same carved floral molding detail as the door. Those buildings would be about 100 years older than the vanity fittings. Nitpicky, small detail. I love her apartment.
I actually have a way normal life for a teenage girl.
So now we're going to talk about Amy Heckerling's movie Clueless from 1995. This is a very well-designed movie. Her line is, I'm like a typical normal American teenager, and you see her use her computer to go through her virtual closet, which we will later see has a dry cleaner's track in it. That sets the bar for her reality. Every beat through this movie, from this grand staircase coming down to her father's home office, which is just solid McMansion mahogany, every room is super clearly what it's supposed to be. In my opinion, lives up to that bar that was set in that early scene with the virtual closet. One thing that's become very popular in Los Angeles, where real estate is so expensive, is people try to cram all of the details of Versailles onto kind of like a small lot.
Cher, get in here.
Yes, Daddy?
Even though these choices are, let's say, very sort of bling bling nouveau riche, predictable, they're delivered with a real visual clarity, and the palette is very desaturated. Like, you have this black and white entryway and you're sitting in the dining room. It's got these like gold rimmed chairs and you see these bright, bold pieces of modern art. She pops out of there in her colorful outfits. The design of the movie completely helps define and support that world. This is Practical Magic, directed by Griffin Dunn in 1998. It's the story of two sisters who are witches.
What's going on in here?
Just making toast is all.
And they're dealing with a curse that has been put on them, under which any man who they fall in love with dies. This is a friggin' great looking movie. I think it avoids two traps. One is to make them and their house scary, which it's not. The other is to lean in the opposite direction and make it feminine and benign, and instead just sexy and cool and historic and modern. And it makes you understand why men fall in love with the women who live in a house like this. And if you go into Sandra Bullock's bedroom, it's got this kind of warm, yellowy tone which repeats itself in a lot of romantic comedies. What I think works about this kind of very complex kitchen with a lot of layers and depth is that if you're a witch, the kitchen is your laboratory. In a Victorian house like this, the people who lived in the house didn't cook. Houses were built for servants, so they tended to be either in the basement or tacked onto the back, and that's what they've done here, which is why you can get away with having this vaulted ceiling. And what's beautiful about it is the depth with those glass cabinets that kind of divide the room in half, and the idea that women who are witches have to have an herb garden attached to their kitchen brings in this very kind of natural botanical element. I'm not sure that I've ever seen a conservatory attached to the kitchen. Like, usually I think of them being separate in the backyard, but it's a delicious visual detail. The production designer is a woman named Robin Standifer. She's one of the first people who looked at the inspiration for this and said, what happens if I cross a house with a laboratory? These two worlds that were very separate in the period where they were invented, she brought them together. What I think she's so wisely done is removed color from the house. That contrast makes the house really just kind of modern and chic. The black shiny floor with the white cabinets and the white stairs coming down. And similarly, in the front entry, those black stairs and the black wainscoting and beautiful, rich colored oil portraits. It's a way of taking the history of the people and the house and wrapping them together in a way that feels contemporary without feeling inauthentic. We're watching Something's Gotta Give, which I designed, directed by Nancy Meyers in 2003. Jack Nicholson ends up falling in love with the mother of a woman that he's dating. When half of the movie takes place in a single set, the house sort of does become a character in the movie. Wow. Our initial impression of the house sets us up to want to meet the woman who lives there. My inspiration for designing Something's Gotta Give obviously came from the writer-director Nancy Meyers. Something's Gotta Give, in particular, was very personal, and she had spent a summer in the Hamptons to write this. What we tried to do is reflect the sensibilities of a successful woman, an independent woman, a woman who's a writer and values books. She has kind of an interesting collection of art that doesn't overwhelm the house, but that reflects who she is and what she likes. I visited the Hamptons. I actually scouted from an airplane because a lot of the homes are large and gated and you can't really see them. So I went up in the air and I literally with a map book marked out all of these different houses. This home, which is in Southampton on Meadow Lane, was one of those houses. The interior we built on a soundstage, and there are a lot of elements that are similar to Nancy's own house, kind of ubiquitous in the Hamptons. The kitchen is where Erica first meets Harry.
Okay, you stay where you are. We have a knife.
Do you live here?
It's where they have this great midnight snack where she makes him pancakes in the middle of the night. My favorite little detail in the house is the little corbel brackets underneath the upper cabinets in the kitchen. The color scheme of the movie is pretty typical of a house in the Hamptons. Shades of white, the kind of rich ebony floors. Her bedroom has a little bit of a bluish cast, and his bedroom has a little bit of a yellowish cast. That big blue and white striped jury rug that you see in the overhead shot in the living room. Those are the things that become anchor points that we try to make everything work around. After I did this movie, I went to someone's house and I was introduced to a woman who said, "Oh my God, I love that house." And I said, "I didn't invent that house. What I try to do when I design a movie is kind of choose and synthesize the best details from those houses." And she said, "You know, it's so funny you should say that." She said, "Because that plate shelf in the dining room, that's my house." And I was like, "What?" And truthfully, her house had been published in House and Garden magazine that year, and we fell in love with this plate shelf. And what I will tell you that I know for a fact, the issue of Architectural Digest that featured this house is apparently the most backordered issue of Architectural Digest. A lot of people remember the movie for that kitchen.
You think the story's gonna have a happy ending?
Happy endings are stories that haven't finished yet.
This is Mr. and Mrs. Smith, directed by Doug Liman in 2005. It's a story of a husband and wife who, unbeknownst to each other, are both paid assassins. The way the house is decorated is, I think, very intentionally impersonal. Everything is sleek and in its place, and there's a whole scene where she's talking about the curtains and what the new curtains look like, and at the same time, all of that sleek, sophisticated interior has the sense that they're hiding something. The inside of this house completely flips the expectation of the exterior of the house. The exterior of the house, which is kind of typical, traditional, colonial American. You then go to the inside of the house and you see the kitchen, the little black tile, which is the same on the countertop and the walls. That's something that I wouldn't do. And I also wouldn't use the little black tile on the counter surface. But when you get to the bathroom, I feel like I'm in the presidential suite of the Mandarin Oriental Hotel, which is exactly appropriate for a husband and wife who are international hitmen. I also have a little bit of an issue with the bedding in their bedroom, which is kind of shiny. The stripes are run on the bias. In Havana, they were together and they were having sex, and now they're this kind of duplicitous couple who are married but sort of lying to each other. So they have their international, jet-setty, sophisticated life hiding behind the veneer of this traditional exterior. This is 10 Things I Hate About You from 1999, directed by Gil Junger. This is an updated teenage version of Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew.
New rule. Bianca can date. When she does.
This movie fit into the sort of comfortable, upper middle class, domestic rom-com. Whether it's an adult romance, a teen movie, or a family, the common denominator in a movie like this is the setting of the story is connected to a warm, inviting, positive family home. They clearly shot in a practical location. The house is beautiful. We'll notice again and again that this kind of warm yellow walls is a popular choice. One of the interesting things is to look at Kat's bedroom. She's the shrewish, difficult older sister. A lot of times, set decoration is a signifier. In other words, if I see a room that's plastered with rock and roll posters, the visual message is angry teenager, right? That's very thoroughly done. I think the message is very clear. And I think these images are the right kind of images. However, I don't think that this set decorator got over the second challenge, which is to make them look like the collage has evolved over time, rather than everything was put up in a haphazard fashion at the last minute. So the dressing, in my opinion, tends to be generic to this kind of movie than it is to tell specific details about a specific family.
Who knocked up your sister?
And we understand there are concerns about your wife.
I don't know where my wife is, and I came home to this. Now, I don't panic easily, but it's weird.
We're now going to talk about Gone Girl, which was directed by David Fincher in 2014. This is a movie about a guy whose wife disappears and he becomes the prime suspect in her disappearance. One of the tricks of the movie is making the audience question what they see. The house and the interiors and the furnishing are so intentionally generic. Everywhere the audience is looking, which is everywhere the police is looking, for some clue, some hint about where is she, what was going on, what was happening, and the house just doesn't give it to you. it looks like no one lives there. There's no history. There's no sense of life there. This veneer of perfect domestic order is just that. How do we take things which should feel safe and familiar and question them? The trick is creating visual tension. And one of the things that happens when the police come back at night and now he's a suspect. So the difference between seeing the house in the day, which is very benign, and at night when it's dark and shadowy and you sense that things are hidden, and to lean into the artifice of a traditional classic American home and to use that trope as a cover and to kind of suggest doubt is a fantastic trick. The Holiday, directed by Nancy Meyers in 2006. I also designed this movie. The Holiday is a story of two women, and they do this online house swapping thing.
Are there any men in your town? Honestly?
If you were a production designer and somebody shot like a minute and a half of footage of Kate Winslet running through your set and being like delighted and delighted and delighted and delighted, it's a production designer's dream. When you look at it in contrast to the house that Amanda shows up in, which is this little tiny stone cottage. And so part of the joke when Amanda gets there is, where do I put my clothes? Where do I put my suitcase? Like, it's tiny, tiny, tiny.
Okay, that'll be interesting.
The goal was to make it as different as possible from Amanda's house in California, but also to try to find something that was quintessentially English, not only in terms of the house and the architecture, but the furnishings. And so when you see the interior of that house, you still understand that a young, interesting woman lives there. So we scaled it up probably by 50% on the inside, and it still feels minuscule. And we had this charming little staircase up to her bedroom. I wanted to bring some of the half timbering into the walls. And then she's got this charming little bathroom with the tiniest freestanding tub you've ever seen. Behind the kitchen, we added this little sort of library office. Just gives you a little bit more light and space, which you might not have clocked, or you might not know where in the house it is. We ended up building this cottage and the stone wall in this little town in Surrey called Sheer. And because we were building the exterior as well as the interior, it gave us the flexibility to figure out how it sits on the site. And so it's got this big field in front of it, and we put the country lane wrapping around it with this wonderful old kind of rambling stone wall. And the trim color, which is that sort of light, almost French blue, and that carries through in the kitchen. There's something about that that lifts the house and makes it contemporary and a little bit feminine. One of my favorite things about the cottage is the way the roof sags. They actually built that sagging roof into the set, and it's one of the things that I think makes it look real. What we were looking for Amanda's house was exactly what Iris reacts to when she sees the set for the first time. We were gonna do more of a kind of a classic Paul Williams house. We thought maybe is the Spanish like too obvious, and one of Nancy's favorite quotes is actually from Billy Wilder, and he said, like, make your subtleties obvious. That house that we chose was actually not only designed by Wallace Neff, it was his own house. The interior was our sort of reimagining of that. There are some antiques, there's a lot of natural wood, there's a lot of stone. It's contemporary, but it has a little bit of a warmth, a sort of slightly feminine sensibility, and that seemed to be appropriate.
This place suits you.
Yeah, right.
I think it was Nancy who said, like, let's go for it. Let's do black cabinets in the kitchen, and once you have that continuity around the room, we put black on the refrigerator because the stainless would have kind of popped out of there. The couch in the kitchen is this great device. You don't really see it until that scene where she's teaching Arthur to walk with his walker. We loved that kind of high wingback love seat as a way to kind of define this walkway part of the kitchen. Our thought was that it was a kind of younger way to live in an older home.
What's so funny?
Well, it's nice to see you too.
Now we're going to talk about The Royal Tenenbaums, Wes Anderson's film from 2001. This is a fantastic movie. The patriarch of the family returning and trying to reconcile with his estranged wife and his 3 grown children.
What are you suggesting? That he come here and stay in my room.
Wes Anderson is one of those directors whose visual style is inseparable from his directorial style. You have characters who stand out against a flat backdrop, but that backdrop tends to be very richly decorated, colorful. The frame is filled with information. Everything is flat, 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 flat. You learn about each of the kids and each of their accomplishments in these very two-dimensional tableaus. And what I think that does is it makes the characters stand out in front of the backdrop. Particularly Margot, you can really see this two-dimensional, flat-on approach. Sometimes he'll tilt down across a surface, sometimes he'll track across a surface, but it's always the character against the background. We see Gwyneth Paltrow locked in the bathroom, in the bathtub, boom, against a two-dimensional backdrop. A wall, a tub, a TV. All of the information that we need to know about that character tends to be in that quirky frame. This game closet where Ben Stiller and his father get into a fight, and it's filled floor to ceiling with all of these board games, like from their childhood. It seems like so much of the detail comes from like very specific childhood memories. A closet full of games, or the tent that Richie, the tennis player brother, lives in. At the end of the story, Owen Wilson crashes his race car into the front of the Tenenbaum home.
Eli just crashed his car into the front of the house.
There is something that happens in that moment where that two-dimensional space breaks down and the story becomes human and connective.
Did you do this?
No.
Now we're going to talk about Love Actually, Richard Curtis's film from 2003. Emma Thompson realizes that her husband's having an affair. She goes from her living room, which is warm and colorful, and the kids are there, and the Christmas tree, and this kind of like ethnic trunk, and it's full of life, and you go into this bedroom, and it's dead. It's gray, and it's empty, and it's quiet. Design-wise, each character needs to have their own distinct and credible world, but we have to believe that there is something visually, stylistically, tonally, which ties them together. Another beautiful sort of cross-pollination is Laura Linney is in love with a guy in the office, and they finally get together. And her bedroom has a lot of the blankness of Emma Thompson's bedroom without the sadness. And what's lovely is it's in like an attic, so it has clipped ceilings. The guy comes up the stairs into the room. It's like a damsel's tower. So Liam Neeson plays a guy who's just lost his wife. His story involves his late wife's son. The balance between Liam's world, which is very much without color, to Emma Thompson's world, which is very much, except for her bedroom, very alive with color, to make each character's space specific and real. But I understand that, like Alan Rickman, who's Emma Thompson's husband, who's a graphic designer, his office, that's the place where the guy who lives in the colorful house works.
This is Dad.
Oh, yes.
Hey, buddy.
Thaddeus.
Oh, beautiful.
Hello, I'm Meredith. I've heard so much about you.
Now we're going to talk about The Family Stone, made in 2005. The director is Thomas Bezucha. This is a surprisingly well done movie, I have to say. Sarah Jessica Parker, whose character's name is Meredith, comes home to meet the family of her fiancé, and they're a tough audience.
They hate me. Yes, I'm being myself.
This is really a movie that is about the house. The choices that they made are real, messy. There is a sense of history in the house. I really admire the density and the texture. To have a conventional refrigerator which has an ice maker. It puts it so oddly and firmly in a period, and I love that. Wallpaper is hard in movies. For me, it works best when it remains a texture. That really happens in this movie. The one exception a little bit is the master bedroom, where I don't think it quite works, but I think that in Ben's bedroom and in the kitchen, there are these subtle kind of faded textures that seem to come from a different era and a different sensibility. A set's supposed to be background. You don't want any one detail to distract or overwhelm the story. And I feel like you have that in terms of the kitchen layout, the kitchen appliances, where Diane's desk is, the sort of layering of patterns. It feels like the rings of a tree. That's how the history of a place gets layered by the people who live in it. It's really, really hard to pull off. So now we're going to talk about North by Northwest. Alfred Hitchcock's film from 1959. Robert Boyle is the production designer. The film is about Cary Grant, who gets kidnapped in a case of mistaken identity.
Not that I mind a slight case of abduction now and then, but I have tickets for the theater this evening.
From the very beginning, he gets kidnapped to this huge house on Long Island. He goes to the United Nations. He goes to Grand Central Station. He goes to Mount Rushmore. He goes to this incredible house. The interesting thing is we never see Roger Thornhill in his house. The first house on Long Island, which is supposed to be Townsend, is this fantastic mansion. And one of the things that Bob Boyle does so masterfully is segue from real locations into stage sets. We pull up outside of a real house and go through a foyer, which I first thought was real, but I think it's a set, into a study, which is definitely a set. And in a combination of practical locations, well-designed and shot set pieces, and matte painting, you sort of seamlessly believe that you're there. And when we get to the end of the movie, they're in this house, which is very much inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright. It's supposed to be in South Dakota, with these soaring wood beams and big stone fireplace. Because it's so much glass, it's very much about landscape and setting. Visually and design-wise, so many of these locations are right on the cutting edge of modern architecture in the late 50s. I don't think there's one right way to design a movie, and I have a feeling that if 6 different designers did Something's Gotta Give, you'd get 6 different versions of that house. What I want to say when I watch my movies again is to say, like, I can't imagine that movie happening anywhere else, and then, then we did our jobs.